Cannery Row, Chapter 17, Part 2 of Chapter 17. It took Doc longer to go places than other people. He didn't drive fast, and he stopped and ate hamburgers very often. Driving up to Lighthouse Avenue, he waved at a dog that looked around and smiled at him. In Monterey, before he even left, he felt hungry and stopped at Herman's for a hamburger and beer. While he ate his sandwich and sipped his beer, a bit of conversation came back to him. Blaisdell, the poet, had said to him, "You love beer so much, I'll bet someday you'll go in and order a beer milkshake." It was a simple piece of foolery, but it had bothered Doc ever since. He wondered what a beer milkshake would taste like. The idea gagged him, but he couldn't let it alone. It cropped up every time he had a glass of beer. Would it curdle the milk? Would you add sugar? It was like a shrimp ice cream. Once the thing got into your head, you couldn't forget it. He finished his sandwich and paid Herman. He purposely didn't look at the milkshake machines lined up so shiny against the back wall. If a man ordered a beer milkshake, he thought, he'd better do it in a town where he wasn't known. But then a man with a beard ordering a beer milkshake in a town where he wasn't known, they might call the police. A man with a beard was always a little suspect anyway. You couldn't say you wore a beard because you liked a beard. People didn't like you for telling the truth. You had to say you had a scar so you couldn't shave. Once, when Doc was at the University of Chicago, he had love trouble and he had worked too hard. He thought it would be nice to take a very long walk. He put on a little knapsack and he walked through Indiana and Kentucky and North Carolina and Georgia, clear to Florida. He walked among farmers and mountain people, among the swamp people and fishermen, and everywhere people asked him why he was walking through the country. Because he loved true things, he tried to explain. He said he was nervous, and besides, he wanted to see the country, smell the ground, and look at grass and birds and trees. To savor the country, and there was no other way to do it save on foot. And people didn't like him for telling the truth. They scowled, or shook and tapped their heads. They laughed as though they knew it was a lie, and they appreciated a liar. And some, afraid for their daughters or their pigs, told him to move on, to get going, just not to stop near their place if he knew what was good for him. And so he stopped trying to tell the truth. He said he was doing it on a bet, that he stood to win $100. Everyone liked him then and believed him. They asked him to dinner and gave him a bed, and they put lunches up for him and wished him good luck and thought he was a hell of a fine fellow. Doc still loved true things, but he knew it was not a general love, and it could be a very dangerous mistress. Doc didn't stop in Salinas for a hamburger, but he stopped in Gonzales, in King City, and in Paso Robles. He had hamburger and beer at Santa Maria. 2 in Santa Maria, because it was a long pull from there to Santa Barbara. In Santa Barbara he had soup, lettuce, and string bean salad, pot roast and mashed potatoes, pineapple pie, and blue cheese and coffee, and after that he filled the gas tank and went to the toilet. While the service station checked his oil and tires, Doc washed his face and combed his beard, and when he came back to the car, a number of potential hitchhikers were waiting. "Going south, mister?" Doc traveled on the highways a good deal. He was an old hand. You have to pick your hitchhikers very carefully. It's best to get an experienced one, for he relapses into silence, but the new ones try to pay for their ride by being interesting. Doc had had a leg talked off by some of these. Then, after you have made up your mind about the one you want to take, you protect yourself by saying you aren't going far. If your man turns out to be too much for you, you can drop him. On the other hand, you may be just lucky and get a man very much worth knowing. Doc made a quick survey of the line and chose his company, a thin-faced salesman-like man in a blue suit. He had deep lines beside his mouth and dark, brooding eyes. He looked at Doc with dislike. "Going south, mister?" Yes, said Doc, a little way. Mind taking me along? Get in, said Doc. When they got to Ventura, it was pretty soon after the heavy dinner, so Doc only stopped for beer. The hitchhiker hadn't spoken once. Doc pulled up at a roadside stand. Want some beer? No, said the hitchhiker, and I don't mind saying I think it's not a very good idea to drive under the influence of alcohol. It's none of my business what you do with your own life, but in this case, you've got an automobile, and that can be a murderous weapon in the hands of a drunken driver. At the beginning, Doc had been slightly startled. Get out of the car, he said softly. What? I'm going to punch you in the nose, said Doc, if you aren't out of this car before I count 10. 1, 2, 3. The man fumbled at the door catch and backed hurriedly out of the car. But once outside, he howled, I'm going to find an officer. I'm going to have you arrested. Doc opened the box on the dashboard and took out a monkey wrench. His guest saw the gesture and walked hurriedly away. Doc walked angrily to the counter of the stand. The waitress, a blonde beauty with just a hint of goiter, smiled at him. What'll it be? Beer milkshake, said Doc. What? Well, here it was, and what the hell. Might just as well get it over with now as sometime later. The blonde asked, Are you kidding? Doc knew wearily that he couldn't explain, couldn't tell the truth. I've got a bladder complaint, he said. Bipalchatoronsinectomy, the doctors call it. I'm supposed to drink a beer milkshake. Doctor's orders. The blonde smiled reassuringly. Oh, I thought you were kidding, she said archly. You tell me how to make it. I didn't know you was sick. Very sick, said Doc, and due to be sicker. Put in some milk and half a bottle of beer. Give me the other half in a glass. No sugar in the milkshake. When she served it, he tasted it wryly. And it wasn't so bad. It just tasted like stale beer and milk. It sounds awful, said the blonde. It's not so bad when you get used to it, said Doc. I've been drinking it for 17 years.